The year is 1924, and the heavy iron doors of Blackwood Asylum in rural Massachusetts creak shut behind a young woman named Clara Hensley. Her screams echo through the damp stone corridors, swallowed by the oppressive silence of a place that feels more like a tomb than a hospital. Her wrists are bound, her eyes wild with terror as two orderlies drag her toward Ward C, a ward whispered about in hushed tones, even among the staff. No one knows what happens behind its bolted doors, but one thing is certain: those who enter Ward C are never seen again. Picture this. Clara, barely 22, her auburn hair matted with sweat, clawing at the air as the orderly's grip tightens. Her crime? Hysteria, they called it. A vague diagnosis pinned on women who dared to feel too much, think too deeply, or defy the men in their lives. But as her cries fade into the darkness of Ward C, a chilling question lingers. Was Clara truly mad, or was she a victim of something far more sinister? Something orchestrated by the very institution meant to protect her? This is the story of Blackwood Asylum, a place where the line between sanity and madness blurred, where patients vanished without a trace, and where a horrifying truth lay buried beneath decades of silence. What you're about to hear will pull you into a world of fear, betrayal, and the darkest corners of the human mind. By the time we're done, you'll question whether the real monsters were the patients or the doctors who held the keys. What makes this case so unsettling isn't just the disappearances. It's the whispers of experiments, of minds broken not by illness but by design. It's the idea that behind Blackwood's ivy-covered walls a secret was hidden so grotesque it could unravel everything you believe about trust, medicine, and morality. What could drive a hospital to erase its own patients? What truth was so dangerous that it demanded their silence forever? This story will haunt you, not just because of its horrors, but because it reveals how fragile the boundary is between safety and danger, between healer and predator. We're diving into a case that exposes the vulnerability of the human spirit, showing how easily trust can be twisted into a weapon. If you're ready to face the darkness, to uncover a truth that's been buried for nearly a century, you're in the right place. So, let's make a pact. Hit that like button to help spread this chilling tale to others who need to know the truth about Blackwood Asylum. And in the comments, leave the phrase, "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story." By doing this, you're not just watching. You're joining a community of truth seekers, brave enough to stare into the abyss of the human psyche. Congratulations for taking that first step into the unknown. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The air in Blackwood Asylum was thick with the smell of mildew and despair, a suffocating reminder that hope rarely survived within its walls. It was early spring of 1924, and Clara Hensley's disappearance into Ward C was already fading from the minds of those outside the asylum's iron gates. But for the patients left behind in the general wards, her absence was a wound that refused to heal. Whispers spread like wildfire among them. Clara wasn't the first to vanish, and she wouldn't be the last. The patients spoke of others, men and women, young and old, who had been taken to Ward C under the cover of night, their names erased from the asylum's records as if they'd never existed. In the dim light of the common room, where patients shuffled in tattered gowns under the watchful eyes of orderlies, a man named Thomas Reed began to piece together fragments of the mystery. Thomas, a former schoolteacher committed for delusional paranoia after claiming his neighbors were poisoning his water, was sharper than his diagnosis suggested. His mind, though frayed by months of confinement, clung to details others overlooked. He noticed the patterns: patients who questioned the staff too loudly, who resisted their treatments, or who simply seemed to know too much were the ones summoned to Ward C, and none returned. Thomas kept a secret journal, scribbled in the margins of a tattered Bible he'd smuggled past the orderlies. In it he recorded what he saw: the way the head psychiatrist, Dr. Elias Morrow, lingered outside Ward C's door at odd hours, his face pale and drawn, as if haunted by what lay beyond. Thomas noted the strange deliveries that arrived at the asylum's back gate, wooden crates marked with cryptic symbols, unloaded under moonlight by men who never spoke. And he overheard fragments of conversations between nurses, hushed words about the procedure and the benefactors, a shadowy group whose influence seemed to loom over Blackwood like a storm cloud. One night, Thomas crept closer to Ward C, his bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. The corridor was a labyrinth of shadows, lit only by flickering gas lamps that cast eerie shapes on the walls. As he neared the ward's heavy door, he heard something that froze his blood. A low, rhythmic chanting, like a prayer spoken in a language he couldn't understand. It wasn't the voice of a patient in distress. It was deliberate, controlled, almost ritualistic. And then a scream. Not Clara's, but someone else's, sharp and desperate, cut off abruptly as if smothered. Thomas pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding, as the chanting resumed, now laced with a chilling calm. What was happening behind that door? Thomas didn't know, but he felt the weight of something unnatural, something that went beyond the cruelty of neglect or the cold indifference of medical malpractice. Blackwood wasn't just a place of confinement, it was a machine, grinding down souls for a purpose no one dared name. The patients who vanished weren't just forgotten. They were erased, their stories rewritten as if they'd never walked the earth. And yet Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that Clara, wherever she was still fighting to be heard. For the viewer, this moment is a descent into dread. Imagine being Thomas, your sanity questioned, your freedom stripped away, yet stumbling upon a secret so dark it threatens to consume you. What would you do? Would you risk everything to uncover the truth, or would you turn away, praying the shadows didn't follow? This is the terror of Blackwood. Not just the fear of what's hidden, but the fear that knowing might destroy you. As Thomas retreated to his cot that night, clutching his Bible, he made a vow. He would find out what Ward C was hiding, no matter the cost. He didn't yet know that his search would lead him to a discovery so horrifying it would shake the very foundations of the asylum and his own mind. The truth was closer than he realized, but it was guarded by forces far more powerful than he could imagine. Thomas Reed's vow hung heavy in the stale air of his cell, a fragile thread of determination amid the asylum's suffocating gloom. The days blurred into one another at Blackwood, marked only by the monotonous clang of meal trays and the distant wails that pierced the night. But Thomas was no longer content to merely survive. He had become a hunter in a den of wolves, seeking clues in the shadows that others feared to acknowledge. His journal, now hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his room, grew thicker with observations, sketches of the asylum's layout, notes on staff routines, and questions that gnawed at his sanity like rats in the walls. It started with small risks. During the supervised yard time, where patients were herded like cattle under the gray Massachusetts sky, Thomas befriended a frail woman named Evelyn Cartwright. Committed in 1922 for melancholia after her husband's mysterious death, Evelyn had eyes that held the weight of unspoken horrors. Her hands trembled as she spoke, but her voice was steady when she leaned close to Thomas one afternoon, the wind carrying the scent of impending rain. "They take them for the trials," she whispered, her gaze darting to the orderlies patrolling the fence. "Dr. Morrow calls it science, but it's something else. Something unholy." Evelyn's words unlocked a floodgate. She had worked as a nurse's aide before her commitment, giving her glimpses into the asylum's underbelly. She described how Ward C wasn't just a segregation unit, it was a laboratory, funded by anonymous benefactors who demanded results in exchange for their silence. Patients selected for treatment were subjected to experimental procedures, injections of unknown serums, electroshock therapies pushed beyond ethical limits, and surgeries that altered not just bodies but minds. "They erase them," Evelyn confided, her voice cracking. "Not kill, at least not always. They change them, make them into vessels, empty shells that serve some greater purpose." Thomas pressed her for more, his heart racing as thunder rumbled in the distance. Evelyn spoke of overhearing Dr. Morrow in heated arguments with a visitor, a tall man in a dark suit, his face obscured by a fedora, who arrived monthly with those cryptic crates. The man represented the Society, a clandestine group obsessed with unlocking the human mind's potential, believing that madness held the key to evolution. They funded Blackwood's operations, turning it into a testing ground for their theories. Patients who vanished weren't dead. They were transformed, released back into the world as unwitting agents, their memories wiped and personalities reprogrammed to carry out tasks they couldn't comprehend. But Evelyn's revelations came at a price. That night, as Thomas lay awake replaying her words, he heard footsteps in the corridor, soft, deliberate, unlike the usual heavy tread of orderlies. Peering through the small grate in his door, he saw two figures escorting Evelyn toward Ward C. She didn't struggle. Her eyes were vacant, as if she'd already surrendered to the inevitable. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. Had she been marked because of their conversation? Or was this part of a larger purge, silencing those who knew too much? Driven by guilt and fury, Thomas escalated his efforts. He feigned illness during a routine checkup, allowing him access to the infirmary where records were kept. While the nurse stepped away, he rifled through drawers, his fingers trembling as he uncovered a ledger hidden behind stacks of bandages. The pages were filled with names, dozens, hundreds, crossed out with red ink, annotated with codes, transferred to C, procedure successful, disposed. Clara Hensley's name was there, dated just days before with a note, resistant. Accelerated protocol. What did it mean? Thomas's mind reeled, imagining Clara strapped to a table, her screams muffled as doctors probed her psyche with tools of torment. The ledger also hinted at the benefactor's true aim, not cure, but control. Entries referenced psychic enhancement, mind, linkage, and collective consciousness, pseudoscience, blended with occult undertones. Dr. Morrow's notes described patients emerging from Ward C as improved, their behaviors synchronized. As if linked by an invisible thread, Thomas shuddered at the implications. Was Blackwood breeding an army of the broken puppets for a shadowy elite? The thought invaded his dreams, turning sleep into a battlefield where faces of the vanished pleaded for release. Yet, amid the horror, a spark of hope flickered. In the ledger's margins, Thomas found a scribbled map, a crude diagram of underground tunnels beneath the asylum, leading from Ward C to an old chapel on the grounds. Perhaps an escape route or a way in. He memorized it before slipping the ledger back, his resolve hardening like steel in a forge. Evelyn's disappearance fueled his fire. He would infiltrate Ward C, expose the atrocities, and if possible, rescue those still trapped within. For anyone listening to this tale, the dread builds like a storm on the horizon. Imagine being Thomas or Evelyn, your world shrinking to these walls where every whisper could be your undoing. The emotional toll is immense. The isolation, the paranoia, the crushing weight of secrets that could shatter lives. This isn't just a story of disappearance. It's a mirror to our own vulnerabilities, showing how easily society discards the unfit, how power corrupts those who wield it over the mind. As Thomas plotted his next move, unaware of the eyes watching him from afar, the asylum's secrets coiled tighter, ready to strike. The truth about Ward C was a venomous serpent, and Thomas was inching closer to its fangs, driven by a mix of courage and desperation that could either free him or doom him forever. Thomas Reed's fingers traced the memorized lines of the map in the dim glow of a stolen candle stub, his breath shallow as he crouched in the corner of his cell. The asylum's nightly symphony of moans and distant clangs provided cover for his thoughts, but the weight of what he planned pressed upon him like the stone walls themselves. Evelyn's face haunted him, her vacant stare as she was led away, a silent accusation that he had pushed her too far too soon. The ledger's secrets burned in his mind. Transformations, mind linkages, a society pulling strings from the shadows. He couldn't wait any longer. Tonight he would breach the underbelly of Blackwood, descending into the tunnels that snaked beneath Ward C like veins feeding a monstrous heart. The opportunity came during the graveyard shift, when the orderly's vigilance waned under the pull of exhaustion. Thomas had feigned a fit earlier that evening, convulsing on the floor of the common room until they restrained him and returned him to his cell without the usual thorough search. Hidden in his sleeve was a makeshift tool, a shard of metal pried from his bed frame sharpened against the rough stone over sleepless nights. With it, he worked at the loose floorboard, prying it up with painstaking care to avoid the telltale creak that could summon guards. Beneath lay a small void, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through if he exhaled fully and ignored the scrape of jagged edges against his skin. Dropping into the crawl space, Thomas entered a world forgotten by light. The air was dank, heavy with the scent of earth and decay, mingled with something sharper, perhaps chemicals seeping from above. He crawled forward on hands and knees, the map guiding him through the labyrinth. Left at the first junction, straight past the dripping pipe, right where the ceiling dipped low. His progress was agonizing, punctuated by the skitter of unseen creatures and the occasional rumble that vibrated through the dirt like the asylum's pulse. Memories flooded him, his life before Blackwood, teaching eager children in a sunlit classroom now reduced to this feral scramble in the dark. What had brought him here? Paranoia, they said, But now he wondered if his suspicions had been a premonition of this very nightmare. After what felt like hours but was likely mere minutes, Thomas reached a great set into the tunnel's ceiling. Peering up, he saw the faint outline of the old chapel's floorboards, warped and dusty from disuse. The chapel, long abandoned after a scandalous suicide years prior, stood on the asylum's outskirts, its steeple a skeletal finger against the night sky. With the metal shard, he unscrewed the grate's fastenings, each turn a risk as rust flaked down like accusing snow. Finally it gave way, and he hoisted himself into the chapel's nave, where moonlight filtered through cracked stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows on the pews covered in cobwebs. The silence here was profound, broken only by the wind whispering through gaps in the walls. Thomas moved cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The map indicated a hidden door behind the altar, disguised as part of the wood paneling. He found it, a subtle seam yielding to pressure with a soft click. Beyond lay a steep staircase descending into deeper darkness, the steps worn smooth by untold passages. As he descended, the air grew colder, laced with a metallic tang that set his teeth on edge. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls, not hallucinations but actual voices, muffled and overlapping, like echoes from a crowded room far away. At the bottom, the tunnel widened into a corridor lined with rusted pipes and flickering electric bulbs strung haphazardly. This was the undercroft of Ward C, a realm where the asylum's facade of care crumbled away. Thomas crept forward, his heart thundering as he approached a series of doors, each marked with numbers faded by time. Behind the first, he heard machinery, a low hum punctuated by clicks and whirs like a factory assembling nightmares. Pressing his ear to the cold metal, he caught snippets. Vital signs stable. Initiating Phase 2. It was Dr. Morrow's voice, clinical and detached, as if discussing weather rather than human lives. Emboldened by terror, Thomas tried the handle, unlocked, perhaps in arrogance or oversight. The door swung open to reveal a chamber that defied comprehension. Tables lined the walls, each bearing a patient strapped down, their bodies connected by wires to hulking machines that pulsed with unnatural light. Intravenous lines dripped luminous fluids into veins, and electrodes dotted shaved scalps, sparking intermittently. In the center stood Dr. Morrow, his white coat stained with indeterminate fluids, conferring with assistants in masks. One patient, Evelyn, lay motionless, her eyes open but unseeing, as if her soul had been siphoned away. Thomas stifled a gasp, retreating before he was spotted. But in his haste, his foot caught a loose wire, sending a spark across the floor. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as footsteps pounded toward him. He fled down the corridor, deeper into the maze, the map now a jumbled mess in his panic-stricken mind. Doors blurred past, storage rooms filled with crates of serums, files stacked high with case studies of successes and failures. One room held cages, not for animals but for humans, curled in fetal positions, murmuring incoherently about the collective and the greater mind. The pursuit echoed behind him. Orders shouted in clipped tones, "Intruder in sublevel! Seal the exits!" Thomas's lungs burned, his vision tunneling as he turned corners blindly. He burst into a larger chamber, a hub where tunnels converged, and there, illuminated by overhead lamps, was the heart of the horror. A massive apparatus dominated the space, a web of glass tubes and copper coils humming with energy. Inside, suspended in viscous fluid, floated figures, patients, their features distorted, eyes glowing faintly as if linked in some ethereal network. Clara Hensley was among them, her body preserved but her expression one of eternal agony, tendrils of light connecting her to others in a grotesque symphony of shared consciousness. The sight rooted Thomas in place, a wave of revulsion crashing over him. This was the society's vision, not healing but harnessing madness to forge a hive mind, where individuals dissolved into a collective force, controllable and expendable. The implications chilled him. The vanished weren't dead. They were repurposed, their essences harvested for experiments that blurred the line between science and sorcery. What power could such a network wield? Espionage, influence, domination over thoughts themselves? A hand clamped on his shoulder, spinning him around. An orderly's face loomed, twisted in rage. Thomas fought, the shard slashing wildly, drawing blood before more hands restrained him. Dr. Morrow approached, his eyes cold as Arctic ice. "Mr. Reed," he said softly, "your paranoia was well-founded after all. But curiosity has led you astray. A syringe glinted in his hand, plunging into Thomas's neck. The world blurred, voices merging into a cacophony as darkness claimed him. In that moment of fading consciousness, Thomas felt a pull, not just oblivion but a merging, tendrils of thought brushing his mind like invasive fingers. The emotional abyss yawned wide, betrayal by those sworn to protect, the erasure of self, the horror of becoming part of something monstrous. For the listener, this descent mirrors our deepest fears: the loss of autonomy, the corruption of trust, the fragility of the individual in the face of systemic evil. As Thomas slipped away, the tunnel's echoes carried on, secrets burrowing deeper, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek them out. But Blackwood's grip was tightening, and the revelations were far from over. The syringe's sting lingered like a venomous bite, as Thomas Reed's world dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors and whispers. The chamber's harsh lights faded, replaced by an inky void that pulled at his thoughts, unraveling them thread by thread. He felt himself slipping not into unconsciousness, but into something far more invasive, a shared expanse where individual boundaries blurred and dissolved. Dr. Morrow's face hovered in his dimming vision, a mask of clinical curiosity, as assistants dragged Thomas toward one of the empty tables. Straps tightened around his limbs, cold metal against skin, anchoring his body while his mind drifted free. In this liminal space, Thomas encountered the collective, a throbbing network of consciousnesses, each a fragment of the vanished patients. Clara Hensley's presence brushed against him first, a torrent of fragmented memories, her arrival at Blackwood, the false diagnosis of hysteria masking her real affliction, knowledge of her father's embezzlement from the very society funding the asylum. She had been silenced not for madness but for threatening exposure. Her thoughts flooded Thomas. Images of electrodes pressed to temples, serums that burned through veins, rewriting neural pathways to link her to the hive. "We are one now," her voice echoed, not spoken but felt. A chorus joined by others. Evelyn's essence mingled in, weaker but defiant, her melancholia a cover for grief over her husband, murdered by society agents when he discovered their operations. The collective revealed layers Thomas hadn't imagined. Blackwood was one node in a network of asylums across the Northeast, each harvesting minds for the society's grand design. Founded in the late 1800s by industrialists obsessed with eugenics and occultism, the society sought to create a superior class, individuals whose minds could connect telepathically, influencing politics, finance, and society from the shadows. Patients weren't discarded. They were integrated, their psyches fuel for this psychic web. As the serum coursed through Thomas, he fought the pull, clinging to his identity like a drowning man to driftwood. Flashes of other lives assaulted him. A young artist committed for visions that were, in truth, glimpses of the collective bleeding through. An elderly veteran whose war traumas masked classified knowledge. A child prodigy whose intellect was deemed too dangerous unbound. Each story wove into the tapestry, revealing the asylum's true purpose, not rehabilitation but assimilation. The floating figures in the tanks were anchors, their bodies sustaining the network while their minds roamed free, executing subtle manipulations in the outside world. Thomas's resistance sparked anomalies in the system. The machines hummed erratically, lights flickering as his paranoia manifested as disruptive thoughts, questions that rippled through the collective, stirring dormant doubts. "Why us?" echoed from Clara. "What have we become?" From Evelyn. The hive designed for unity, cracked under the weight of individuality. Dr. Morrow noticed barking orders. "Increase dosage. Stabilize the link." But Thomas delved deeper, accessing forbidden memories buried in the network's core. He saw the society's origins, clandestine meetings in opulent mansions, where tycoons like Rockefeller-inspired figures mingled with mystics, funding experiments blending Mesmer's hypnotism with emerging psychiatry. Blackwood, built on ancient Native American grounds rumored to hold spiritual energies, amplified their efforts. Early failures, patients driven to true insanity, escapes that nearly exposed them, led to refinements. The serums derived from rare Amazonian plants, electrotherapy tuned to specific frequencies, surgeries implanting crystalline devices to enhance connectivity. One revelation struck like lightning. The benefactors weren't just wealthy patrons. They included government officials ensuring Blackwood's autonomy from oversight. Disappearances were covered as transfers or releases, records falsified with ease. Thomas felt the collective's power, subtle influences on elections, stock markets manipulated by planted suggestions, rivals silenced through induced breakdowns. The horror deepened. This wasn't mere control. It was evolution, the society positioning themselves as gods with the vanished as their unwilling angels. Yet, in the chaos of merging, Thomas found a vulnerability. The network relied on harmony. Discord could shatter it. He broadcast his memories, his teaching days, simple joys of life outside, to overwhelm the system with humanity. Screams erupted from the tanks, machines sparking as connections frayed. Assistants panicked, unhooking wires while Dr. Morrow injected countermeasures. Thomas's body convulsed on the table, but his mind surged, linking directly to Clara's. Together they pushed back. A rebellion in the ether. The emotional torrent was overwhelming. Loss of self. The agony of stolen lives. The betrayal by society's guardians. For the viewer, this is the core terror. The mind, our last sanctuary, invaded and colonized. Imagine your thoughts no longer yours, shared in a forced communion where privacy dies. It evokes empathy for the vanished, horror at the perpetrators, and a chilling question. How many such shadows lurk in history's margins? As the rebellion peaked, alarms wailed throughout the asylum. Orderlies rushed in, but the damage was done. Patients in the general ward stirred as if sensing the upheaval. Thomas, teetering on the edge of assimilation, glimpsed a way out. A hidden failsafe in the machinery. A self-destruct sequence buried in Morrow's own notes. If he could reach it physically. But the serum pulled stronger, threatening to drown him in the collective forever. The struggle intensified, the tunnels above echoing with footsteps as reinforcements arrived. Blackwood's secrets were unraveling, thread by psychic thread, and the night was far from over. The alarms pierced the undercroft like shrieks from the damned, red lights pulsing in sync with the erratic heartbeat of the failing machinery. Thomas Reed's body arched against the restraints, veins bulging as the serum waged war within him. But his mind was a battlefield aflame, a storm of discordant thoughts tearing through the collective like lightning through clouds. The failsafe he had glimpsed in Morrow's notes wasn't a physical switch, but a conceptual one. A sequence of thoughts, a deliberate cascade of doubt and humanity injected into the network's core. Drawing on his teacher's instinct, Thomas broadcast lessons from his past, poems of freedom, equations of logic, memories of love and loss, flooding the hive with the raw essence of individuality that the society had sought to eradicate. Clara's presence strengthened beside him in the ether, her resolve crystallizing as the disruption spread. "Fight with me," her thought form urged, merging not in submission but in alliance. Evelyn joined, her grief transforming into a weapon, sharp and unyielding. Other voices rose, fragments of the vanished, long suppressed, now awakening in a chorus of rebellion. The tanks bubbled violently, the suspended bodies twitching as neural links frayed. One figure, a burly man Thomas recognized from the ledger as a former laborer, committed for agitation, thrashed so fiercely that his restraints snapped, fluid spilling across the floor in a glowing cascade. Dr. Morrow slammed his fist on a console, his composure cracking for the first time. "Containment breach! Isolate the anomalies!" He bellowed, but his assistants fumbled, sparks flying from overloaded circuits. The collective, designed as a symphony of control, devolved into cacophony, patients' psyches clashing, memories overlapping in chaotic bursts. Thomas saw flashes. A society meeting in a gilded hall, where masked figures discussed deploying their assets to sway a presidential election. Experiments on children, their innocent minds molded into spies. Alliances with foreign occultists, trading secrets for forbidden knowledge. The rebellion spilled upward, psychic waves rippling through Blackwood's structure. In the general wards, patients stirred from their drugged stupors, eyes snapping open with unnatural clarity. An elderly woman, long catatonic, sat up and whispered, "The chains break." Orderlies, sensing the shift, hesitated in their rounds, some clutching their heads as intrusive thoughts invaded, doubts about their roles, visions of the horrors below. One orderly, a young man named Harlan with a conscience not yet fully numbed, dropped his keys and fled toward the exit, muttering about ghosts in his mind. Thomas, harnessing the chaos, directed the energy toward the failsafe. It was a mental command buried in the system's architecture, a safeguard Morrow had installed in arrogance, never expecting it to be used against him. Overload protocol, Thomas thought, channeling the collective's turmoil into a focused surge. The machines responded with a groan, gauges redlining as power surged. Explosions rocked the undercroft, tubes shattering, serums igniting in fiery bursts. The floating figures slumped, links severing as bodies were freed from their ethereal prisons. Clara's body gasped, lungs filling with air instead of fluid, her eyes focusing for the first time in weeks. She tore at her restraints, weak but alive, as others followed. The chamber descended into pandemonium. Freed patients stumbling, assistants fleeing. Morrow cornered against a wall. "You fool!" he spat at Thomas, who now strained against his straps, the serum's grip weakening. "The society will crush this. You're nothing but insects." But Thomas felt the tide turning. The psychic backlash extended beyond the asylum. Distant members of the society, linked subtly to the network, experienced migraines, visions of exposure. In Boston, a banker clutched his temple during a meeting, seeing Clara's face accusatory in his mind's eye. In New York, a politician faltered mid-speech, words of manipulation twisting into confessions. The web was unraveling, threads snapping under the weight of reclaimed souls. Yet victory was bittersweet. As connections broke, Thomas felt the pain of separation. The vanished patients' essences retreating, some fading entirely, their bodies too damaged to sustain life without the machines. Evelyn's presence dimmed, a final whisper of gratitude before silence. Clara, now physically free, helped unstrap Thomas, her hands trembling. "We did it," she rasped. But her eyes held the haunted look of one who had seen the abyss. The emotional core of this uprising was profound. The triumph of the human spirit against mechanized oppression, the agony of loss amid liberation. For those immersed in the tale, it's a visceral reminder of resilience. The way suppressed voices, when united, can topple empires built on shadows. Imagine the exhilaration mixed with terror, the cost of freedom paid in psychic scars that might never heal. Above ground, the asylum erupted into chaos. Patients pounded on doors, orderlies barricaded themselves, and the night sky filled with shouts. Harlan, the fleeing orderly, reached the gates and flung them open, an act of redemption born from the psychic storm. Sirens wailed in the distance, perhaps authorities, or society enforcers racing to contain the breach. Thomas and Clara, supporting each other, navigated the tunnels upward, the map now irrelevant in the frenzy. They emerged into the chapel, moonlight bathing them in ethereal glow. But pursuit followed, Morrow rallying loyalists armed with sedatives and resolve. The rebellion had cracked Blackwood's foundation, but the structure still stood, secrets clinging like vines. As they fled into the woods surrounding the asylum, branches whipping their faces, Thomas glanced back. Flames licked the windows now, the overload spreading to electrical systems. The night air carried screams not of pain but of release. Yet the society's reach was long. Survival meant evasion, exposure meant war. The story deepened, layers peeling to reveal not just institutional horror, but a conspiracy threading through society's veins. What would become of the survivors? Could they dismantle the network, or would the shadows reclaim them? The woods surrounding Blackwood Asylum swallowed Thomas Reed and Clara Hensley like a living entity, branches clawing at their ragged clothes as they stumbled through the underbrush, the acrid smoke from the burning building stinging their eyes and lungs. Flames leaped high behind them, illuminating the night sky in a hellish orange glow, casting long shadows that danced mockingly across the trees. The asylum, once a monolithic symbol of control and secrecy, now roared in defiance, its structure groaning as fire consumed the corridors and chambers where so many horrors had unfolded. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a harbinger of arriving authorities, or perhaps society operatives disguised as rescuers, intent on salvaging their fractured empire. Thomas's legs burned with exhaustion, each step a battle against the lingering effects of the serum that still coursed through his veins. Flashes of the collective haunted him, echoes of minds not fully severed, whispering warnings or pleas that blurred the line between reality and residue. Clara leaned heavily on him, her breath ragged, her body frail from weeks in suspension. "We can't stop," she gasped, her voice a threadbare whisper laced with determination. "They'll come for us. The society, they never let go." Her words carried the weight of her father's secrets, the embezzlement that had drawn their ire, turning her life into a nightmare scripted by invisible hands. As they pushed deeper into the forest, the ground uneven and treacherous underfoot, Thomas's mind raced through the implications of their escape. The rebellion in the ether had been a spark, but the fire now raging at Blackwood was literal, potentially destroying evidence of the experiments, the tanks, the ledgers. Yet he knew the society's tendrils extended far beyond one asylum. Other facilities, other nodes in their psychic network would sense the disruption. Would they sever connections to contain the damage or mobilize to hunt down the survivors? Thomas glanced back, seeing silhouettes against the blaze. Orderlies, perhaps Morrow himself, organizing a pursuit. Harlan's act of opening the gates had freed more patients, scattering them into the night like ghosts released from purgatory. The pair crested a small hill, pausing in the shadow of an ancient oak to catch their breath. Below, the asylum resembled a bonfire of vanities, flames licking the chapel's steeple where Thomas had emerged from the tunnels. Explosions punctuated the inferno, perhaps the machinery in the undercroft detonating or stored serums igniting in chemical fury. Clara clutched Thomas's arm, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. "Look," she murmured, pointing to figures stumbling from the gates. Patients, disoriented but free, some helping others, their gowns singed and faces smeared with soot. A few turned back, drawn by morbid curiosity or unfinished business, but most fled into the surrounding countryside, vanishing into the darkness like whispers carried on the wind. This sight stirred a profound emotion in Thomas, a bittersweet triumph laced with sorrow. These were the forgotten, the vanished made visible again. Their stories no longer erased but etched in the scars of survival. Yet how many had perished in the chaos? Evelyn's fading presence in his mind suggested not all could be saved. Some minds had dissolved entirely in the network's collapse, their bodies mere husks left behind. The human cost was staggering, a ledger of loss that outweighed any victory. For the listener drawn into this tale, it's a moment of raw empathy, the exhilaration of liberation tempered by the grief of what was irretrievably broken, a reminder that freedom often comes at the price of innocence lost. Pushing onward, Thomas and Clara navigated by the stars peeking through the canopy, aiming for the nearest town, Milford, some 5 miles away. The forest was alive with nocturnal sounds, owls hooting ominously, leaves rustling as if conspiring against them. Paranoia, Thomas's old companion, resurfaced with vengeance. Every snap of a twig could be a pursuer, every shadow a society agent. Clara shared fragments of her ordeal as they walked, her voice gaining strength with each revelation. "They hooked me up to that machine," she recounted, shivering not from the chill but from memory. "I felt others inside my head, strangers' thoughts, emotions. It was like drowning in a sea of souls." And Morrow, he spoke of the greater good of evolving humanity. But it was power they craved, control over minds to shape the world in their image. Thomas nodded, his own experiences mirroring hers. He described the ledger, the map, the chamber of horrors. Together they pieced together more of the puzzle. The society's influence in high places, senators swayed by subtle psychic nudges, businesses thriving on insider knowledge gleaned from the collective. The 1920s, an era of jazz and prosperity on the surface, hid undercurrents of manipulation, where Blackwood's experiments were but one thread in a vast web. What if the stock market's fluctuations weren't chance but orchestrated? What if wars were ignited by planted fears in leaders' minds? The implications chilled them deeper than the night air. A sudden rustle ahead halted them. From the undergrowth emerged a figure. Harlan, the orderly, his uniform torn, face streaked with ash. "Wait," he called softly, hands raised in surrender. Thomas tensed, ready to fight, but Clara stayed his hand.
"He's the one who opened the gates," she said.
Harlan approached cautiously, his eyes reflecting the distant fire's glow. "I couldn't stay," he confessed, voice trembling. "What they were doing, I saw it all tonight. The voices in my head, they showed me everything. I have to help you expose them." Skepticism warred with necessity in Thomas's mind. Was Harlan genuine or a plant sent to recapture them? The serum's residues made trust a fragile thing, but Clara's intuition swayed him. "We need allies," she urged. Harlan revealed he had snatched a satchel from Morrow's office in the chaos. Documents, photographs of experiments. names of society members. This could bring them down, he said, slinging the bag over his shoulder. The trio pressed on, bonded by shared trauma, their footsteps synchronized in a rhythm of resolve. But the hunt was closing in. Behind them, engines roared, cars from the society perhaps, or local police under their influence. Lanterns bobbed through the trees, voices shouting coordinates. Thomas led them off the path into denser thickets where pursuit would falter. Thorns tore at their skin, but pain was a small price for evasion. As dawn's first light filtered through the leaves, they reached a stream, its waters cold and swift. Crossing it would erase their scent from any dogs, Harlan suggested, drawing on his rural upbringing. The crossing was perilous, slippery rocks, current tugging insistently. Clara slipped midway, gasping as water engulfed her, but Thomas hauled her up, their grip a lifeline amid the torrent. On the far bank they collapsed, sodden and exhausted, but the sounds of pursuit faded. Harlan spread out the documents under the rising sun, lists of asylums, formulas for serums, correspondence with influential figures. One letter, signed by a prominent industrialist, detailed plans for expanding the network nationwide, using the collective to influence the upcoming election. The revelations fueled their fire. This wasn't just survival, it was a crusade. Yet danger loomed. Morrow had survived the blaze, Harlan confirmed, rallying forces. The society would stop at nothing to reclaim their secrets, silencing witnesses with efficiency honed over decades. Thomas felt a psychic twinge, a remnant link perhaps, warning of approaching threats. Emotionally, this flight encapsulated the human struggle, the pursuit of truth amid peril, the forging of unlikely alliances in darkness. For those following the narrative, it's a pulse-pounding escalation, evoking fear for the protagonists, admiration for their courage, and a gnawing suspense about what dawn would bring. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that seemed to point accusatorily, the group plotted their next move: reach Milford, contact a trusted journalist Thomas knew from his teaching days, and unleash the evidence upon the world. But the forest held more secrets, and the reckoning was just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Massachusetts forest, casting dappled light on the weary faces of Thomas Reed, Clara Hensley, and Harlan the orderly as they huddled over the pilfered documents on the stream's far bank. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the smoky inferno they had fled, but tension hung heavy like fog, unbroken by the birdsong that seemed mocking in its normalcy. Thomas's hands, still trembling from the serum's after effects, rifled through the satchel's contents. Yellowed papers, grainy photographs depicting patients mid-procedure, their faces contorted in silent screams, and letters sealed with wax imprints bearing an enigmatic symbol. A stylized eye encircled by thorns, the society's insignia. Clara, her auburn hair tangled and matted, pointed to a map unfolded among the papers. It detailed not just Blackwood, but a constellation of similar institutions scattered across New England. Willowbrook in Connecticut, shrouded in rumors of vanishings. Eldridge Sanitarium in Vermont, where cures left patients hollow-eyed puppets. And others, linked by dotted lines representing supply routes for serums and equipment. "This is bigger than we imagined," she whispered, her voice laced with dread. "They're everywhere, like roots burrowing under the soil of society." The map noted hubs where collectives were strongest, feeding into a central node in Boston, a mansion owned by Elias Hawthorne, a reclusive magnate whose public facade as a philanthropist masked his role as the society's architect. Harlan, leaning against a moss-covered rock, added his insights, his youthful face aged overnight by guilt and revelation. "I overheard Morrow talking about Hawthorne once," he said, his words halting. "Said he was the visionary, blending science with something older. Rituals, maybe. The serums aren't just chemicals. They're infused with extracts from ancient texts, things smuggled from Europe." The documents confirmed this. Recipes blending pharmacology with alchemical notations, referencing grimoires and forbidden herbs said to unlock the third eye of perception. One letter from Hawthorne to Morrow urged acceleration. "The election looms. Our assets must be deployed to ensure favorable outcomes. The collective will sway the masses subtly, plant seeds of doubt in rivals, bolster our candidates with waves of unspoken support." Thomas absorbed this, his teacher's mind piecing together the grander scheme. The 1924 presidential race, with Coolidge seeking re-election amid economic booms and social upheavals, was a perfect stage for manipulation. The society aimed not for overt control but insidious influence, psychic nudges causing voters to favor policies benefiting their industrial empires, suppressing labor unrest through induced apathy, even engineering scandals via planted hallucinations in key figures. A photograph slipped from the stack. Hawthorne in a group portrait with Morrow and others, their eyes gleaming with shared fanaticism. Behind them, a blurred figure, perhaps a patient, hovered like a ghost, a testament to the human fuel powering their ambitions. The emotional undercurrent swelled within Thomas. Outrage at the perversion of knowledge, sorrow for the exploited, and a burning resolve to uproot this conspiracy. For Clara, it was personal. Her father's embezzlement had been a desperate act against Hawthorne, who had blackmailed him into silence. "He tried to warn me," she confessed, tears tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. "That's why they took me. To tie up loose ends." Harlan, racked by complicity, vowed redemption. "I turned a blind eye for too long. No more." Their respite shattered with the crack of a branch nearby. Instinctively, they gathered the documents and ducked into thicker foliage, hearts pounding. Voices filtered through the trees, harsh, commanding tones of men on the hunt. "Fan out!" "They can't have gone far," one barked. Thomas peeked through leaves. A group of 5 dressed in dark coats, armed with rifles and lanterns despite the daylight. Not local police. Their movements were too coordinated, their faces set in cold determination. Society enforcers, no doubt dispatched by Morrow or Hawthorne himself. The trio moved stealthily, paralleling the stream to mask their footsteps in its babble. But the pursuers were relentless, guided perhaps by remnants of the collective's psychic traces. Thomas felt it, a faint tug in his mind like a string pulled taut, suggesting not all links had been severed. "They're tracking us," he murmured, urgency sharpening his voice. Clara nodded, experiencing the same invasive whispers. Harlan, unexposed to the serum, relied on his knowledge of the terrain. "There's a logging road ahead. If we reach it, we can hitch to Milford." The chase intensified, the forest transforming into a labyrinth of peril. Bullets whizzed past as the enforcers spotted movement, splintering bark and sending birds fleeing in panic. Thomas's group darted between trees, adrenaline surging. Clara twisted her ankle on a root, stifling a cry, but Thomas hauled her up, their bond forged in fire unbreakable. Harlan fired a warning shot with a pistol he'd grabbed from the asylum, buying precious seconds. In a clearing, confrontation erupted. 2 enforcers closed in, one snarling, "Hawthorne wants the documents and your heads." A scuffle ensued. Thomas grappled with one, using his makeshift shard to slash at the man's arm, drawing blood. Clara, drawing on hidden reserves, kicked the other in the knee, sending him sprawling. Harlan finished him with a blow from a branch. But more approached, forcing retreat. Deeper revelations emerged mid-flight. A document Clara clutched detailed Phase 2. Expanding the collective beyond patients to volunteers, society members implanting devices for enhanced abilities, creating an elite class immune to the masses' frailties. "They're becoming monsters themselves," Thomas realized, horror mingling with disgust. The emotional toll mounted, fear of capture, grief for lost innocence, but also empowerment in resistance. They reached the logging road as rain began to fall, fat drops turning the dirt to mud. A truck rumbled by, laden with timber, its driver a burly logger oblivious to the drama. Harlan flagged it down, spinning a tale of a hiking accident. Skeptical but kind-hearted, the driver agreed to take them to Milford. As they climbed aboard, enforcers burst from the trees, firing wildly. The truck accelerated, bullets pinging off metal, but they escaped, the forest receding like a closing curtain. In Milford, a quaint town of clapboard houses and a bustling main street, they sought refuge in a dingy inn, paying with coins scavenged from Harlan's pockets. Thomas contacted his old friend, journalist Samuel Klein, via a hurried telegram. "Urgent. Conspiracy exposed. Meet at station." Klein, known for investigative pieces on corruption, arrived by train that afternoon, his wire-rimmed glasses and notebook marking him as a seeker of truth. Over coffee in a back room, they unveiled the evidence. Klein's eyes widened at the photographs, his pen flying across pages. "This could topple empires," he said, voice hushed. But caution tempered excitement. The society has eyes everywhere. We need to publish fast in multiple outlets. Plans formed. Klein would wire stories to the Boston Globe, New York Times, alerting authorities untainted by influence, yet shadows lingered. That evening, as rain lashed the windows, a knock echoed, an enforcer, disguised as a traveler, inquiring about runaways. A tense standoff ensued, resolved when Klein's quick thinking summoned the local sheriff, a no-nonsense man wary of outsiders. The enforcer fled, but the message was clear. The hunt persisted. The night's revelations deepened the conspiracy's veins. Documents hinted at international ties, alliances with European occult societies, exchanges of knowledge for artifacts said to amplify psychic powers. One chilling entry: experiments on immigrants deemed expendable for their lack of ties vanishing without inquiry. The human element pierced Thomas. These were people, not data points. Families shattered, lives erased for a delusion of superiority. Emotionally, this chapter evoked a whirlwind. The thrill of evasion, the weight of responsibility, the flicker of hope amid encroaching darkness. For the audience, it's a gripping escalation, drawing parallels to real-world abuses of power, stirring indignation and solidarity with the underdogs. As night deepened, the group prepared for the next phase, going public, risking all to dismantle the web. But Morrow and Hawthorne plotted in the shadows, their counterstrike brewing like the storm outside. The storm raged outside the inn's thin walls in Milford, rain hammering the roof like accusatory fingers, while inside, the dim lamplight flickered over the faces of Thomas Reed, Clara Hensley, Harlan, and Samuel Klein, casting elongated shadows that seemed to writhe with unspoken fears. The room smelled of stale coffee and damp wood, a makeshift war council where the air thickened with the gravity of their discoveries. Klein's notebook lay open, pages filled with frantic scrawls, names, dates, descriptions of atrocities that would make the hardened journalist's stomach turn if he dwelled too long. "We strike at dawn," Klein declared, his voice steady despite the pallor of his face. "I'll send the wires tonight, but we need copies. Insurance against retaliation." The documents spread across the bed were damning. Blueprints of psychic amplifiers, victim testimony smuggled in code, and a ledger linking Hawthorne to congressional bribes, all painting a portrait of a conspiracy that infested the veins of American power like an insidious parasite. Thomas paced the creaking floorboards, his mind a whirlwind of remnants from the collective, faint echoes that whispered of impending doom, as if the severed links still pulsed with malice. "They're closing in," he muttered, glancing at the window where rain-smeared glass reflected his haunted expression. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, bandaging her swollen ankle, her eyes fierce with the fire of survival. "We've come this far," she said, her tone a blend of defiance and vulnerability. "My father died for this truth. We owe it to him. To all of them." Harlan nodded, his hand steady as he duplicated key pages by hand, the pencil scratches a rhythmic counterpoint to the thunder. His redemption arc felt tangible now, a shift from complicit silence to active resistance, but guilt lingered in his eyes like unshed tears. As midnight approached, the group's vigilance paid off. A subtle creak from the hallway alerted them, an enforcer, perhaps the same one from earlier, attempting stealth. Klein, ever the quick thinker, had barricaded the door with a chair, buying moments. Thomas grabbed a fire poker from the hearth, its iron cold and reassuring in his grip. The door rattled, then burst inward with a splintering crack, revealing two shadowed figures, rain-drenched coats glistening, faces obscured by fedoras pulled low. "The documents now," one growled, pistol glinting in the lamplight. Chaos erupted. Harlan lunged, tackling one assailant, papers scattering like autumn leaves. Clara hurled a lamp, oil igniting on impact and setting the curtain ablaze, flames leaping hungrily. Thomas swung the poker, connecting with the second enforcer's arm, a sickening thud followed by a yelp. Klein shouted for the sheriff, his voice piercing the din. The fight was brutal, primal, fists flying, bodies slamming against walls, the room a battlefield of desperation. One enforcer, bloodied but relentless, grabbed Clara by the hair, pressing the gun to her temple.
"Stop or she dies."
Time froze. The crackle of fire the only sound amid heaving breaths. Thomas's heart hammered, visions from the collective flashing. Clara's memories of suspension, her unyielding spirit. "You can't silence us all," Thomas said, voice calm despite the terror. In that moment, Harlan surged from behind, disarming the man with a chokehold learned from asylum restraints. The sheriff arrived, drawn by the commotion, his badge a beacon of local authority uncorrupted by distant shadows. The enforcers were subdued, cuffed and dragged away, muttering threats of retribution. But interrogation yielded little. They were hired muscle, loyal but ignorant of the deeper web. Society? Never heard of it, one lied through split lips. The fire was contained, but the room smoldered, a metaphor for the group's frayed nerves. Klein, undeterred, dispatched his telegrams from the inn's office. Words flying across wires to newspapers hungry for scandal. Dawn broke gray and unrelenting, the storm abating to a drizzle as headlines began to brew. The Boston Globe's presses would soon churn out exposés. Asylum atrocities, secret societies' mind control experiments revealed. Evidence poured in, surviving patients from Blackwood trickling into Milford, their stories corroborating the horrors. One, a frail artist named Lydia, described visions induced by serums, paintings she created under duress that depicted society rituals, circles of hooded figures chanting around crystalline altars, channeling energies from the vanished souls. Her artwork, smuggled out, became visual proof, disturbing in its detail. Distorted faces merging into a singular entity, symbolizing the collective's abomination. Yet, the unveiling brought backlash. Telegrams arrived for Klein, warnings from anonymous sources, threats veiled as legal jargon. Hawthorne's mansion in Boston stirred with activity, aides burning files, mobilizing lawyers and lobbyists to discredit the claims as ravings of the mad. Morrow, surviving the blaze with burns that twisted his features into a grotesque mask, went underground coordinating counter-narratives, Blackwood's fire and accident, patients' disappearances, fabrications by disgruntled staff. The society's influence manifested subtly, editors hesitating, stories buried on back pages, witnesses intimidated. Thomas felt the psychic remnants intensify, a warning that the network, though damaged, persisted. In a quiet moment, he confided in Clara, "I still hear them, faint but there. What if we're still connected?" She took his hand, her touch grounding. "Then we use it against them. Turn their weapon into ours." Their bond deepened, forged in shared trauma, a flicker of humanity amid the darkness. Harlan, now a key witness, found purpose, his testimony adding insider weight. The emotional crescendo built, elation at exposure mixed with dread of reprisal, the fragility of truth in a world of shadows. For the viewer, this unveiling mirrors societal reckonings, whistleblowers risking all, the slow grind of justice against entrenched power. It evokes empathy for the resilient, horror at the pervasive evil, and suspense as the battle shifts from physical to ideological. As days blurred, arrests followed, lower society members rounded up, but Hawthorne remained elusive, his empire cracking yet intact. Thomas, Clara, and allies went into hiding, planning the final blow. A public hearing where survivors would speak, unraveling the conspiracy thread by thread. But whispers persisted. Enforcers in the night, psychic assaults manifesting as nightmares. The shadows were unveiling, but they fought back, coiling for a strike that could eclipse the dawn. The rain-soaked streets of Boston shimmered under gaslights as Thomas Reed, Clara Hensley, and their small band of survivors huddled in a safe house, a cramped attic above a print shop owned by Samuel Klein's cousin. The air was thick with the scent of ink and fear, the walls vibrating faintly with the presses below, churning out pamphlets that screamed the truth about Blackwood Asylum. It was late April 1924, and the city buzzed with whispers of scandal, the headlines sparked by Klein's relentless campaign now echoing in bar rooms and parlors. Yet the society's shadow loomed larger than ever, its influence a hydra that sprouted new heads with each cut. The attic's single window framed a city unaware of the war unfolding in its underbelly, a war for truth, for the souls stolen by ambition disguised as progress. Thomas stood by the window, his reflection gaunt, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights haunted by psychic echoes. The remnants of the collective lingered, faint but persistent, like a radio signal fading in and out. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting documents, her face a map of resolve and weariness. Harlan, now a steadfast ally, kept watch at the door, his former orderly's uniform replaced by a borrowed coat, his hands steady, but his eyes darting with every creak of the old building. Klein scribbled furiously, drafting a speech for the public hearing set for tomorrow. A grand jury convened under pressure from mounting evidence and public outcry. "This is our moment," Klein said, voice low but fierce. "We expose Hawthorne, Morrow, all of them. The world will know what they've done. The documents, now painstakingly copied and distributed to trusted allies, painted a chilling portrait. Blackwood was but one node in a network of asylums stretching across the country, each a crucible for the Society's experiments. Letters revealed foreign ties to German occultists, Russian mystics, trading knowledge for artifacts rumored to amplify psychic connections. One photograph, singed but intact, showed a crystalline device implanted in a patient's skull, glowing faintly, captioned, "Conduit to the Collective." Another document outlined Phase 3, integrating the technology into willing elites, creating a ruling class with minds linked across continents immune to dissent. The human cost was staggering. Thousands vanished, their identities erased, their essences fuel for a dream of omnipotence. The survivors' stories added flesh to the evidence. Lydia, the artist, had joined them, her paintings now exhibits for the hearing. Each canvas a window into the horrors of Ward C. Her latest work depicted a faceless figure crowned with thorns, eyes glowing, surrounded by spectral hands reaching from a void, a haunting allegory of the Society's ambition. Other survivors, trickling into Boston from Blackwood's chaos, spoke of memories not their own, of dreams where they walked as puppets in distant cities, influencing strangers. One, a former mechanic named Jacob, described sabotaging a factory under psychic compulsion, unaware until the collective's collapse freed his mind. Their voices, raw and fractured, wove a tapestry of suffering that demanded justice. Yet justice was a slippery quarry. Elias Hawthorne's mansion remained impenetrable, guarded by wealth and influence. Dr. Morrow, his face scarred by the fire, had vanished. Rumors placing him in a sister asylum were hidden in Hawthorne's network. The Society countered with propaganda, articles dismissing the accusations as lunacy, survivors smeared as delusional. A senator, linked to Hawthorne in the documents, publicly denounced the hysteria, his words eerily synchronized with others across states, a lingering echo of the collective's power. Thomas felt it in his nightmares, visions of Morrow's cold eyes, whispers urging surrender. Clara, too, battled psychic intrusions, waking with screams of, "They're still inside us." The hearing loomed as their last stand. Klein had rallied reformists, clergy, and skeptical journalists, creating a groundswell too loud to silence. The attic became a nerve center, survivors coaching each other to testify, their fear tempered by collective resolve. Clara, her voice steady despite trembling hands, practiced her account. Her father's betrayal, her own entrapment, the machine that stole her autonomy. Thomas prepared to reveal the ledger, its red-inked names a litany of the lost. Harlan, once complicit, would confess his role, exposing the asylum's inner workings. Lydia's art would speak louder than words, its visceral horror undeniable. The night before the hearing, danger struck. A brick shattered the attic window, a note tied to it. "Silence or perish." Enforcers circled the print shop, their shadows flickering under streetlights. Klein's cousin, a burly man named Amos, barred the doors, wielding a shotgun with grim determination. A tense standoff ensued, resolved when a crowd of locals, roused by the pamphlets, gathered, their presence a shield. The enforcers retreated, but the message was clear. The Society would fight to its last breath. Dawn broke on the hearing, a cavernous courthouse packed with reporters, reformers, and skeptics. Thomas took the stand first, his voice cracking but growing stronger as he recounted the tunnels, the tanks, the collective's invasion of his mind. Clara followed, her testimony a blade cutting through the room's murmurs, detailing her father's sacrifice and her own violation. Harlan's confession drew gasps, his insider perspective shattering denials. Lydia's paintings, displayed on easels, silenced the crowd, their raw power a mirror to the soul's fragility. The emotional weight was crushing. Pride in their courage, grief for the vanished, terror at the conspiracy's scope. For the viewer, this climax is a catharsis, the underdog's defiance against a Goliath of corruption, a reminder of humanity's capacity to resist even when broken. It evokes questions. How many unseen powers shape our world? How many truths remain buried? The jury deliberated as protests swelled outside, the public ignited by the revelations. Arrests began. Lower society members compromised officials, but Hawthorne remained untouchable, his absence a taunt. Morrow's whereabouts were a mystery, his influence a specter, yet the collective's collapse had weakened their grip. Psychic attacks diminished, survivors' minds clearing like fog lifting from a battlefield. As weeks passed, the survivors scattered, some seeking new lives, others haunted by their scars. Thomas and Clara stayed in Boston, working with Klein to unearth more nodes, their bond a beacon in the darkness. The society retreated, but whispers persisted of new experiments, new asylums rising from Blackwood's ashes. Congratulations, you've reached the end of this harrowing journey. You're part of a rare group that dared to face the truth about Blackwood Asylum. A truth that peels back the veneer of civility to reveal the monsters beneath. In the comments, share. This story changed how I see the human mind. By doing so, you join the most committed seekers of hidden truths, building a community that amplifies the silenced. Share this video to spread the story, to ensure the vanished are never forgotten. Subscribe because the inexplicable awaits in every shadow, and this channel is your guide to the enigmas no one dares tell. Keep watching, keep questioning, because the truth endures, but only if we fight for it.